There's a great quote from you. You said, if you hear someone tell you he was really tight with Tupac and never had a problem with him, he's lying or exaggerating the friendship, which is great. So tell me why is that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, growing up, how we were raised was to always question everything. So Pac had an opinion. He didn't care what you thought about it or whatever. If he thought something or if he questioned something, which was everything, he would question it. And if he had an opinion, he would voice it. And true or not, it was his opinion. And if you had a problem with it, that was your problem. So, and Tupac, on top of that, he had his own opinions that everybody didn't agree with. Like for me, Pac was not a very tidy person. So when we would share rooms, he'd roll his blunts and just leave it out, leave his clothes everywhere. I was raised to make my bed, right? So like the Odd Couple, Oscar and Felix.
And you guys had the room together.
And we had the room together. Yeah. So we get into it about that. Or if I disagree with his opinion or he disagreed with my opinion, it could escalate. But anybody that I know that really knew him has the same story. So if you never had an issue with Pac, you didn't really, really know him like that. Because if you know him long enough, you're gonna have, he was very, I don't wanna say combative because that makes it seem like he meant to cause conflict, but he didn't shy away from it if that's what it took for his opinion to be expressed. He wasn't backing down from, or he wasn't, what's the word when you just kind of like.
He wasn't like a shrinking violet.
Yeah, just to let you get your thing. He wasn't that guy.
Right.
If he thought something, he would let you know.
He wasn't conflict avoidant, as they would say, right? Today, right? Yeah. Like, oh, you disagree? Why? Right?
Not disagree. Why? He just be like, I disagree.
You're wrong. You disagree, you're wrong.
Not even you're wrong. He just say, I disagree, or tell me why.
Right.
Why do I have to do that just because you said? Why does that make sense? That doesn't make sense to me. If it didn't make sense to him, he wasn't just going to do it because you asked him to do it.
Right.
Even if it made sense. If it didn't make sense to him, he wasn't going to just, he needed to know why.
So weed mellowed him out. Alcohol was not good for him. It kind of made him more aggressive, but weed tended to like chill him out a little bit.
Yes, I think that Tupac was, now we have sort of like a diagnosis for everything and everybody and all these different whatever. Back then, we were just people, right?
Right.
And if it was 2026, he would probably be considered anxiety, high, stress.
Right.
He had a lot of stress, even as a young person, right? And he was super hyper and amp. To me, it seemed like weed made him normal.
Right.
It made him act level and sort of like calm. So and I didn't understand it back then, but every morning he always wanted weed to start his day. And he was irritable, and that's when we would get into a lot of our fights, right, early. Once he got weed, then he'd be all right.
Yeah.
So I don't think that he necessarily smoked weed to just get high, and it wasn't like a.
It was more like self-medicating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What we understand now is medicinal use. It was medicinal for him more than it was like a party favor. Now drinking, when I met him, because I'm like the drink professional. All right. He wasn't much of a drinker when I first met him. probably, and maybe we were a bad influence, I don't know. But early on, he was more weed and not so much drinking. Of course, we know that towards the end, he mentioned a lot of Alizé and all of that stuff. But when I met him, he wasn't a huge drinker.
Do you know the story where you guys were touring with Public Enemy and Tupac like confronted a guy who was selling bootleg Public Enemy swag in the parking lot? And Tupac was like threatening to like kill the guy. This is a story a kid from Kid and Play told this story. But he says that basically, but he said it didn't matter that it was Public Enemy swag this guy was bootlegging. It wasn't Digital Underground swag, so it wasn't his fight. But he says, but Tupac was down for the fight. In his mind, your beef was his beef.
Okay, so love Kid, right? But that's not the actual story.
Okay.
So what actually happened was somebody stole Chuck D of Public Enemy's jacket out of his dressing room. We were in Oklahoma City, I believe. And the reason I remember it is because Big Dion Evans, The Impossible, who produced most of Tupac's first album and a lot of his second album. He produced Brenda's Got a Baby, When My Homies Call, Changes originally, Do for Love, the original versions. And was his first DJ. His brother was attending college in Oklahoma City. And this guy was a friend of James, who was his brother. And this guy was accused of stealing the jacket, right? And everybody was looking for him. We found him. And basically, just because of that, Tupac was ready. I don't think if he did actually, but I know he was ready to attack this guy, to sort of retaliate and defend Public Enemy, who we were all on tour with, and we were like, we were family on the road. So I get that part of it, but no, actually they did jump this guy, and Pac was in the middle of it, and the guy denied it. I don't know if he actually did or didn't. And I've heard later on that, people tell me like there was proof that he did. At that time, to me, it wasn't enough proof. Maybe he did, but if he did, get the jacket back. This guy gotta go. But to attack him, knowing that he was a friend of part of our family, I thought was excessive at the time, and I didn't think it was necessary. But Pac, he wanted to express his loyalty, and he was willing to go to that extent. Pac was a very passionate person. If he had love for you, it was a passionate love. If he had a disdain for you, it was a passionate disdain. Right. And there was no gray area. So, you even hear Pac talk about in his later songs, pick a side, no love for the other side. Military mindset. You are either an ally or an enemy, right? And that's how he lived his life, and that was his mindset. I didn't agree with that particular situation at the time, and that's all that was.
Well, and he was 19 at the time, I believe, and he 6 years later, he's killed, and over a similar circumstance. Frankly, he was kind of getting involved in somebody else's beef, but it was the people he was with. Mm-hmm. It's the same mentality, if it seems like, right?
Exactly.
You're down with me, I'm down with you.
Right.
Your fight is my fight, kind of, with Orlando Anderson and
exactly
the bloods that he was hanging out with, and
mm-hmm.
yeah.
So, it wasn't. So here's the thing. I'm glad you said that, because you hear so many people say, "Oh, he changed into this person with Death Row," or
the Bishop character. He never shook the Bishop character from Juice. Right?
Oh, that was always him. Because that happened before Juice. He was always that.
Right.
And I think that when he was with us, we knew that, but we would always sort of try to step in, or it just so wasn't our energy that it was almost frowned upon when he did that. So he would do it, but it wasn't celebrated, or it wasn't fanned. The flame wasn't fanned. I think in that death row environment, that type of behavior was celebrated, which sort of allowed him to kind of do more of it, which we all know it doesn't help anybody. And we saw what happened.